Earlier today, Adam Schefter shared some of his own inside information on this Jaire Alexander situation. So I want to read some of these quotes that he shared on the show Jen, Gabe, and Chewy earlier today. Here we have it. He says this: "I'll say this, I had heard one team connected to him, and I saw that team at the owners meeting or league meetings. And I went over, and I'm like, any chance you trade for him? And it didn't sound that way. So my read on that was, my guess is that they're not going to like it, but I'll guess that they are more likely to release him than trade him. But it certainly seems like they're holding out hope that they're going to be able to find a trade partner, because they would have moved off him by now and they haven't. So they're continuing to look at, and maybe they'll find something and maybe it'll turn up. But I had heard one team had expressed some interest. I checked in with that team and I'm like, you trading for Jaire? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay. So based off that, my guess is they'll wind up releasing him, but maybe they're able to find a trade partner and get something back for him." And so we know now that the Packers have been trying to trade Jaire Alexander. Gutekunst brought up a few days ago that the Packers would like to get something in return for Jaire if they do end up moving on from him. And I think that if Jaire had been someone who had not dealt with a lot of injuries the past few years, he probably already would have been traded by now. But because of his injury history, because of all the injuries he suffered the past few seasons, there's definitely a risk with Jaire. And if he hadn't been struggling with those injuries, I don't even think these conversations would be happening. I think that he would obviously be on the Packers in 2025. And so obviously it's the injuries that have really complicated things with Jaire Alexander. Now I do wonder who this team is that is interested in Jaire. And my guess is because of those injuries, they don't want to have to trade over the draft capital and then also bring on his salary, which is about $16 or so million in 2025. And if the Packers do end up releasing Jaire, they could sign him to a whole new contract. And so maybe in their minds, it makes better sense financially and cap-wise to have him be released and then bring him in. The thing is, if Jaire is released, that means he's a free agent, and any team could come in and sign Jaire. So if you're that one team, are you willing to risk Jaire deciding to sign with someone else? Or at the end of this, do you say, okay, fine, Brian Gutekunst will give you a 5th-round pick or a 6th-round pick for Jaire just so we can ensure that he's going to be on our roster? I think that's a possibility, and I think that could be why Brian Gutekunst, is still trying to get a trade to happen here, even though no one up to this point has wanted to make it happen. Maybe he thinks eventually, maybe this team or maybe some other team says, okay, you know what, we'll make this trade. And maybe even it comes down to, it could be before the draft, it could be after the draft, but let's say after the draft, you're a team that needs a cornerback and you didn't have a corner fall to you in the draft where you wanted to, and you really feel like you have a big need there. Maybe at that point, someone trades a future draft pick for Jaire just because they feel like they need some corner help there. So there's a lot of possibilities there, and I do wonder what team Adam Schefter is talking about. And I think when we look at the Jaire situation, there's so many different things that could happen. Option one, he actually gets traded. That allows the Packers to free up some more cap space. And there were a lot of you guys yesterday in my comment section after that video on Jaire bringing up how you think it'd be great if the Packers just kept him on the roster in 2025. And I do personally believe that if he's on the roster in 2025, the Packers' corner room is pretty stacked just because you have so much depth with Nate Hobbs coming in. And the question just is for Jaire is, can he stay healthy? Because if he's healthy, he's still a very, very good cornerback. And so when Brian Gutekunst in his front office is contemplating these decisions, a lot of it does come down to, how healthy do they think Jaire's going to be? Do they think it's worth keeping him, knowing that if they do keep him in 2025 and then decide to release him after, let's say, this next year, he'd have close to a $10 million dead cap hit in 2026. And so the Packers do have the option, if they really want to clear up a ton of cap space for 2026, just take the Jaire dead cap hit all in 2025. Because if we look at the numbers, if Jaire is released or even traded before around June 1st, then the $18.1 million dead cap hit is all in 2025. And so then you free up more cap space in 2026, where if you decide to release or trade him after June 1st, then the dead cap hit gets split between 2025 and 2026, $7.9 million in 2025 and $10.2 million in 2026. And so you would get a massive amount of cap space in 2025, about $17.1 million cap space saved for the 2025 season. The question is, though, do the Packers really need that much cap space for 2025? Because already right now, they have about $31 million of cap space at this point, which is around 10th best in the NFL. They've already made some of their moves, bringing in Nate Hobbs, bringing in Aaron Banks. And so if you don't really need to utilize that cap space in 2025, part of me thinks, you might as well just take the whole dead cap hit in 2025. So that way, going forward to 2026, then you have a lot more space next year to potentially bring in a free agent. So I also think that maybe the reason the Packers are holding on to Jaire for now is maybe they think that he could agree to a pay cut. I know that Tom Silverstein had said near the end of February that the Packers had not approached Jaire about a pay cut because they did not think he would take one. The question I have is, has that changed? Have there been any different kind of conversations since that point? Gutekunst did share a few days ago that he has been in contact with Jaire's agent weekly. And so I do wonder what kind of conversations they're having. I think it's a possibility. They already know that they're going to split ways eventually. But maybe they could come to a point where Jaire, when he's looking at the market and figuring out what he would maybe get out there if he were released by other teams, maybe he says, you know what, it's better to stay in Green Bay for a slight pay cut. We know the Packers tried to get Aaron Jones to take a pay cut last year. It was just too much for Jones. He decides to go to Minnesota. And so this is something where there's a ton of possibilities, and it's just something we'll continue to keep an eye on. But for now, he's still on the roster. He has not been traded, has not been released, but we'll keep an eye on this going forward. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below. Feel free to turn on the notifications so you don't miss any Packers news, and I'll see you guys next time.